It was perhaps the most daring airlift ever. Thousands of Jews living in the heart of Ethiopia were rescued in the 1980s and 90s and brought to the state of Israel, literally on eagle's wings. Their origins are shrouded in mystery. Many believe them to be the descendants of the lost biblical tribe of Dan. Another theory is that they descended from the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, Menelik I. No one knows for sure, but some of their religious practices are very old, even ancient, perhaps predating Rabbinic Judaism itself. For centuries, they had believed that they were the last Jews remaining in the world. Not surprisingly, a dispute arose about whether they should in fact be considered Jewish at all under rabbinic law. Which brings to mind the age-old question, who is a Jew? But a number of rabbis around the world ultimately decided that this community, known as Beta Israel, should indeed be counted as Jews. So in 1975, Israel officially accepted the Ethiopian Jewish community as eligible for citizenship under the law of return, which provides for immediate citizen status for any Jew anywhere who wants to live in the Jewish state. But there was a major problem. Ethiopia had, since 1973, been under the rule of a dictator, Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam. Unconventional measures were obviously needed. Some 8,000 members of Beta Israel managed to emigrate to Israel by 1984. But after that, Mengistu forbade any others from leaving. Many thousands actually decided to walk all the way to Israel. They started out by illegally crossing into Sudan. Along the way, thousands perished, and Israel decided to come to the rescue. In late 1984, the Jewish state organized a major airlift, appropriately named Operation Moses, in which some 7,000 Beta Israel were covertly flown from Sudan to Israel. Under pressure from other Arab states, Sudan prohibited further emigration in January 1985. As a result, many Ethiopian Jews were now stranded in Sudan. The United States then got involved, evacuating some 500 Jews from Sudan to Israel in what was called Operation Joshua. Back in Ethiopia, Israeli leaders worked to convince Mengistu to let the rest of the Beta Israel community leave. It amounted to a modern version of Moses saying to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." There was no shortage of heroics. The first Israeli Air Force officer of Ethiopian extraction, Solomon Ezra, put his life on the line hundreds of times, handing out bribes to scores of Ethiopian officials in order to smuggle thousands of Beta Israel out of their isolated villages in the mountains. There they lived in simple grass and mud huts. Their synagogues had been demolished and many murdered. On the long journey to the capital city, Addis Ababa, most fled on foot or hid in trucks. When they arrived, they were sick and destitute and had to wait in deplorable conditions in the city's slums. Solomon earnestly promised that soon they would arrive in the promised land. They prayed that his words were true. As in the days of Moses, plagues ravaged the land. In 1991, famine hit North Africa, and Addis Ababa was under attack by Eritrean rebels. The country was soon on the brink of political collapse. On March 7th, Israeli diplomat Uri Lubrani advised the formulation of an emergency plan for the protection and evacuation of the Jewish community. The plan initially called for the allocation of $35 million to pay the Ethiopian government to allow the Jews to leave. Secondly, there was to be an airlift of all remaining Jews from Ethiopia to Israel. On May 23, 1991, as the rebels were closing in on Addis Ababa, 6 unmarked El Al Boeing 707s and 18 Hercules aircraft, together able to carry 18,000 people, landed on the tarmac, primed and ready for the new exodus. Additional planes followed. They had only a few hours to complete their secret mission before the attacking rebels would make the rescue impossible. One officer who landed the first Boeing 707 in Ethiopia recalled, "The first control tower in the northern part of the country did not even respond to our call, as the local city was taken over by rebels hours earlier. There was a lot of traffic over the airport at Addis Ababa, and we had to wait for 30 minutes before we could land." When Solomon Ezra circulated the news that Beta Israel's prayers had been answered, thousands of Ethiopian Jews dressed in traditional white robes began streaming into a compound near the Israeli embassy. Most were children, along with pregnant women with babies strapped to their backs. The green light came from the government of Israel at 1:45 a.m. Barefoot and struggling to walk, the refugees were to be transported by special buses with Israeli soldiers disguised as civilians and carrying Uzi submachine guns hidden in school bags, guarding them. It was the first time the nervous passengers had ever seen such big birds with metal wings. In order to pack as many passengers as possible onto the planes, the seats were removed, allowing for 1,000 people to board each one. While it was thought that a maximum of 760 passengers could fit on a single plane, the Ethiopians were so malnourished and light that many more could be accommodated. One Boeing 747 carried a record number of 1,087 people. One IAF pilot recounted, "I vividly remember those images from Addis Ababa. An incredible number of people walked toward the plane, organized in groups of 200. The doctors and paramedics provided ongoing support." At noon on May 24th, 1991, the first Boeing 707 took off. At one point, there were 27 planes in the air simultaneously. Over the next 36 hours, 14,324 Beta Israel were airlifted to the Jewish state in what was called Operation Solomon. It was the largest humanitarian airlift in world history. IAF Commander Major General Avihu Ben Nun declared, "Never before did so few pilots transport such a great number of people in such a short time." During the 1,600-mile flight to Israel, doctors managed to deliver 7 babies. When the planes landed in Tel Aviv around 5 p.m., many more doctors sprung into action to take care for the sick and the newborns. Anat Talishir, a reporter for the Israeli newspaper Yediot Achronot, commented, "Everyone looked tired and scared. The people who arrived during Operation Solomon fled their country with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. The children stayed close to their mothers. A young man carried his elderly father on his shoulders. They both bent down and kissed the Israeli soil." Solomon Ezra recalled, "As we flew over the Red Sea, I felt like we were the children of Israel escaping Egypt. The pilots were crying, the soldiers were crying, the bus drivers were crying. Seeing most of my people come home was my life's dream." Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and other government officials were on hand to greet the new arrivals. Army Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Benny Gantz, who led the ground operation, later recalled this modern-day exodus. "I had to deal primarily with technical details. Only during the mission did I get a sense of how meaningful it was to be part of this crucial event. It's a turning point in my service, which encompasses both my Zionist values and the meaning of our existence in this country." It took until 1994 for Israel and Ethiopia to come to an agreement allowing Jewish emigration. Today, there are over 135,000 Ethiopian Jews living in the Jewish state. Not surprisingly, there have been many economic and social challenges, including charges of unfair treatment and ethnic prejudice. Yet the community has, in general, integrated well into Israeli society. Efforts are still underway to bring the remaining members of Beta Israel, whose exact number is still uncertain, back to the Jewish homeland. Avihu Ben Nun remarked, "Operation Solomon truly represents what Zionism is. It demonstrates the purpose for the state of Israel, to provide a home and shelter for Jews around the world who have suffered and were persecuted merely for bearing the Jewish religion." It's unusual for Israelis to be in total agreement on things, but when these Ethiopian immigrants landed in Israel, everyone shared the view that this was one of the country's finest moments.